Evie!
I'm listening.
The Scarlet Sin. That's the beginning and end of it all. How about you try taking a hit?
You're acting a little strange today.
Why does she look 12 and talk like she's 30? She literally looks 30? Well, let's see what they say.
And on the other hand, you have other people upset with the game for reasons like this guy. I was tagged to this situation by...
Because it's the same thing about Nier Automata, but they're very good games. True, like I said, graphically, the combat-wise looks great, but I can't get past their faces looking like little girls. Either way, we'll see how they turn out whenever they're released. I feel like people like this really do a disservice to the actual bad actors that are trying to use, like, lolly content and stuff like that to, like, kind of, like, spread that type of, like, media. Because, like, you muddy the waters a lot. Like, what are we talking about here? It's just such a crazy thing to say. Why does she look 12 and talk like she's 30? Because, like, you muddy the waters a lot. Why does she look 12 and talk like she's 30? Like, what are we talking about here? Why does she look 12 and talk like she's 30? It's just such a crazy thing to say. The new character in Stellar Blade, right? And a lot of people are really angry at me for saying this. They say, woke individuals be like, we love women as long as they're androgynous, have broad shoulders and a man jaw, look feminine, we hate women. And so I responded back to this. I was like, not gonna lie, I think this character looks too young, and I don't think her voice actress matches her appearance either. Even the first game was perfect. This one I'm not as big fan of. Maybe I'm becoming an old man, that's just my 2 cents. Still looking forward to the game, though. So this got a lot of people mad. It did. It got a lot of people pissed off. I'm Asian. My sister looks like that. She's 26. I don't know any. So here's the way I see it. All right, pick a side, bro. Let me see if I can show. Where's the that one photo? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but if you go in if you look at my Instagram following list, you would know that I am an expert on this. That doesn't look like a fucking adult. It doesn't. I'm sorry. That looks like a kid. Yeah, it does. She could pass for 19. I don't think so, bro. I don't.
Not the only one. I'm realizing a lot of anime fans are attacking me for this, which is weird, because this is about how they scan something.
Yeah, it is. It is, of course, anime fans are attacking you because you're saying that the way that they depict their female characters implies that they're pedos, man. Of course people would be upset about being called that. Like, if people were calling you that, you'd be upset too. I mean, it's just nuts. Duh, people would be defensive. That's crazy.
Ever heard the demand that one just ought to be authentic? Just drop all pretenses and say it how it is, Chud, no holds barred. Authenticity requires the unfiltered expression of one's actual innermost thoughts. No matter how raw those ideas may be, nor how uncomfortable they might make other people feel. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to public discourse, it's technically impossible to be fully authentic. And that's because of a phenomenon we like to call the Overton window. The Overton window enforces a shifting band of sayable ideas. And if you ever step outside the Overton window, well, that brings tangible costs. You could be socially ostracized, deplatformed, professional ruin, maybe you lose your audience, or worse. No matter who it is, individuals must self-censor, and everyone to some degree or another will soften their edge in order to remain visible, if that is their goal as some kind of public speaker, influencer, etc. And yes, even the most blunt of truth-tellers must calibrate their output in order to survive. The game then is to pick your battles. You need to employ plausible deniability when you can, and also confine yourself to safe adjacent critiques when necessary. A wise man once said that people want change until change comes, and then they resist it. And so even though people demand authenticity, what this often amounts to is just a mere emotional rawness and relatability, but it's all still delivered to you within an approved window. And if you cross that boundary, that will lead to the same audience labeling you as problematic or insufficiently sanctioned. Retail-level cultural observation mirrors this pattern. People do crave the appearance of the real thing, and yet the underlying constraints of incentives and status canvas will inevitably render genuine supply of authenticity unsustainable. That's why all your online drama cycles are destined to feel performative over time. It's because even under the premise that drama is happening, it's all safely packaged for your consumption. One should also note that every participant in this scheme navigates the same window, all the while they will accuse one another of some kind of inauthenticity. And that's how these influencers compete for your attention. A good analogy for this is that online society consumes authentic personas as commodities, but the market is dictated by the Overton window, which determines what their shelf life is. And while the demand for authenticity may be genuine, the supply of uncompromised authenticity is structurally zero in any social arena that employs any degree of consequence for certain types of speech. And that's why anyone who says that they believe in free speech is either a moron or a liar, because there's virtually no space on the internet that doesn't have some degree of speech controls in place. But still, the demand for authenticity remains, and therefore the only means to fulfill that is to somehow shift the Overton window. Now that was all point number one. Point number two is that the Overton window framework, while it is useful for mapping what is acceptable speech, it also carries with it a built-in optimism bias for whoever invokes it. In other words, it presumes that any detectable shift somehow represents progress toward truth or authenticity. But that assumption is shaky on two fronts. First, that shifts are not directional guarantees. The window can drift or be shoved in directions that actively oppose your values or interests, or the values or interests of your group. So what may look like, oh, finally, the normies are waking up, to one faction, may actually be a new form of capture or degradation to another faction. In other words, people can normalize any number of ideas that are just a net destructive for society. The second front is that perception itself becomes the victory condition for grifters. And what I mean by that is because the concept of the Overton window is inherently subjective and retrospective, it therefore invites motivated reasoning and manufactured momentum. For instance, someone or some network can push language that sounds edgy, it sounds authentic, it sounds anti-woke, they're dropping red pills, they're owning the libs, but it's all without any rigorous evidence, any predictive power or internal consistency. But the problem is, if enough people feel like the window has shifted, through engagement spikes like likes, subs, and quote tweets, well then it will retroactively count as progress in their mental model, even if underlying cultural or institutional realities haven't budged. Take, for example, Asmongold's commentary on the 2026 Summer Games Fest here.
I'm listening.
The Scarlet Sin. That's the beginning and end of it all. How about you try taking a hit?
You're acting a little strange today.
Why does she look 12 and talk like she's 30?
But I frankly don't believe this is Zach's actual opinion here, especially not stated in front of however many viewers he has.
I feel like people like this really do a disservice to the actual bad actors that are trying to use like lolly content and stuff like that to like kind of like spread that type of like media. Because like you muddy the waters a lot. Like what are we talking about here? It's just such a crazy thing to say.
Instead, what this is a form of strategic pearl clutching. It's performative, and here's the strategy. On social media, media discourse now largely functions as a self-sustaining engine for engagement and tribal realignment. All the while nobody suspects there's a subtle cultural reprogramming that goes along with all of this. If you've listened to my commentary about Pirate Nation, for example, found in my expose about what resources were poured into Expedition 33, then you'd have a better idea as what I'm talking about here. In fact, I want to make a brief aside on that for the sake of John De La Rose, who recently brought some things to my attention about all this stuff. Now let us briefly turn our attention to the phenomenon known as Pirate Nation. A fuller examination of this X account might warrant an entire video essay, or, more fittingly, a case study in platform manipulation. But as this inquiry is focused on Expedition 33, we will content ourselves with a summary. For the uninitiated, Pirate Nation is an X user operating at the intersection of gaming news, political commentary, emulation advocacy, and low-effort shitposting. With a follower count of nearly 200,000, the presence of Pirate Nation looms large across multiple digital ecosystems. Pirate Nation is frequently cited in online forums and Discord servers as some kind of a legitimate source of both information and culture, a reputation that is not merely accidental nor entirely earned. The methodology of Pirate Nation is deceptively simple. The account screenshots news headlines, often just cropped enough to obscure any citation of author or outlet. No links, no context, and no path back to the origin. To the casual observer, this might resemble laziness, a byproduct of platform brevity. But to mistake this for inattention is to miss the point entirely. This is astroturfing by design. What we are observing is a deliberate method of traffic sequestration, a siphoning operation in which all information, regardless of source, is rerouted through a single personality's feed. It is the strategic presentation of curated information flows as though they were organic grassroots engagement. And supplementing this technique are what appear to be auxiliary accounts on websites such as 4chan, sock puppeting in the old parlance. These accounts serve the usual function: to echo, to reinforce, and to normalize. They create the illusion of consensus by staging applause. The opinions voiced by Pirate Nation thus do not appear to emerge from a singular vantage, but from a movement, one that is often referred to as based, a movement that is self-assured and conveniently aligned with certain ideological vectors. But there is a particular contradiction at the center of Pirate Nation that is worth noting. On the one hand, Pirate Nation performs as a devotee of Japanese culture, including anime aesthetics, nationalist tropes, and the occasional samurai meme. But this admiration is curiously brittle. It collapses whenever Japanese cultural actors express views or produce media that is out of sync with the worldview of Pirate Nation. Meanwhile, Chinese and Korean corporations receive conspicuously gentler treatment. They are rarely interrogated, often praised, and almost never subject to the same intensity of criticism. This asymmetry is not incidental. It signals something deeper about how culture war positions are brokered through algorithmic loyalty, not cultural coherence. In other words, grift. Pirate Nation is not defending a tradition. Rather, the account is selecting vectors of engagement that optimize attention. Attention, in the end, is the currency that matters here. And of course, Pirate Nation follows larger influencers. Figures like Asmongold, Grums, Heel vs. Babyface, and Melanie Mack. But these should not be read as endorsements, they are extractions. Pirate Nation is not part of their audience. Rather, the account is competing for it. And this strategy, in short, is parasitic. It is dressed in the aesthetics of authenticity. Pirate Nation is just a guy posting takes after all, right? But that is what makes it so effective. Let's do a little math here. Below is a comparative snapshot of engagement rates across several prominent X profiles, measured by average comments per post relative to total followers. This discrepancy is not subtle. Pirate Nation's engagement sits at roughly 2.5 times lower than the baseline one might expect, given the size and overlap of the X account's audience. Pirate Nation shares similar territory with these figures, often echoing their talking points and even performing a kind of algorithmic proximity theater, reposting, replying, and shadowing. Yet despite all efforts of Pirate Nation to weave itself into the same digital ecosystem, the actual community interaction among Pirate Nation followers remains conspicuously anemic. Moreover, Pirate Nation enjoys a surprisingly large following on Blue Sky, a platform on which the account contributes virtually no effort. The numbers suggest something odd, that the audience for Pirate Nation follows the account automatically, without prompting, without friction, as if by instinct or coordination. And now enter the leakers. Among the founding members of Pirate Nation's Discord server are several figures frequently cited by games media as sources. Individuals with usernames like Doodle, Matfacio, and Visceral. These are not anonymous forum dwellers, however. They are serial data miners and self-styled insiders. Most are associated with a loosely defined collective known as Team XOX Leak, a name that appears with regularity in coverage by IGN, Eurogamer, Insider Gaming, and similar outlets. Doodle identifies himself as someone who has broken gameplay leaks for multiple major titles. Matfacio describes himself as a professional data collector, Visceral maintains a portfolio of featured leaks and even advertises himself as available for contact should you be in the market for embargo breaches. They all function as some kind of a shadow press corps, filling the vacuum left by understaffed publications, and they operate with a sort of mythic veneer, and that myth is functional. It benefits official journalists who rely on figures such as Team XOX Leak to bridge content gaps, and that in turn benefits the leakers who gain influence, clout, and sometimes material reward. But for all the idealism attached to leaking, truth-telling, public interest, insider knowledge, one must also of course consider the marketing utility of a well-timed breach. Leaks are rarely accidental. Think of them as early release trailers by another name. If not orchestrated directly, they are at least permitted to remain in digital space as corporate beta tests for market appetite, all cloaked in the illusion of industry rebellion like their QAnon for gamers. This is all about social engineering. It's all a huge psyop for the corporations to put their finger upon the pulse of consumer engagement. All this is to say that Pirate Nation's relationship with XOX Leak is not incidental to Pirate Nation's brand. For all intents and purposes, it is the brand. For without them, there is no reach, no scoop, and no narrative control. And so what at first appears to be a grassroots movement throughout digital space is in reality a clever distribution network. Pirate Nation in this configuration plays a role. A small one perhaps, but a strategic one nonetheless. And there is a term for this role in Chinese internet slang, Wu Mao, a reference to low-paid commentators who flood forums with pro-China messaging and discredit dissenting narratives. When it comes to a lot of the culture war discourse on X in particular, you'll oftentimes see these two names come up regularly. One is Pirate Nation, and the other more minorly is this AI Emerald Apple account. Now what's uncanny here is how often these accounts apply ready-made framing for just about every culture war issue there is. The timing is impeccable on some occasions, and all this convenience just lets participants slot in without any independent scrutiny. Everyone just reposts and nods along as the loop continues. This is why the key word here is manufactured. You're being told to care about things you shouldn't care about. Now keep in mind both of these accounts receive many reposts by a lot of influencers throughout the regular grifting circles. They give themselves to the appearance that they're some kind of dissidents or chuds, but have you ever seen the people who run these accounts appear on any streams, interact personally with anyone, or build visible organic relationships in any online spaces? Yet one consistently sees both of these accounts guide and even steer culture war conversations. Why does nobody question it? Now, if you've seen my Exposition 33 expose, you know my running theory is that this is Chinese propaganda stirring the pot of Western discontent. For the AI Emerald Apple account, it's pretty much in his profile. Honkai Rail and Genshin Impact? Oh, look at all this AI-generated art. So who is this guy? Why does his content get reposted so much? Looking further ahead into the distant future, I suspect we will discover that many influencers operate less as independent voices and more as conduits for prepackaged takes. Behind the scenes, their handlers supply talking points and scripts, all calibrated for the next grift cycle. Gauging this wouldn't be especially difficult. You have a flood of real-time social media data from X and elsewhere, and it all provides perfect telemetry on what fits the current Overton window, and precisely how to nudge it in the desired direction. So you take someone like Asmongold reacting to a video game trailer. The audience assumes it's all organic outrage or genuine observation. The algorithm is simply surfacing hot drama, but one wonders, is there a script on Zach's monitor directing him to claim a character looks like a child when she clearly does not?
Like, what are we talking about here? It's just such a crazy thing to say.
But the chain still propagates. The line gets picked up and echoed by the next account and normalized as some kind of organic discourse. Everyone credits the algorithm. Few suspect orchestration.
And a lot of people are really angry at me for saying this. So this got a lot of people mad. It did. It got a lot of people pissed off.
And even granting this dynamic exists, I doubt it surfaces anytime soon. But when it does, it will likely coincide with AI beginning to displace human streamers and influencers entirely, revealing just how scripted and interchangeable much of this performance has become. In short, one of the primary reasons I never made a new account to return to X is because the platform has just started to become a retweet factory with no original content. And I'm always questioning who's boosting or pulling the strings to increase engagement and what the goal is. The thing about Asmongold is much of what he says is specifically designed for astroturfing disguised as authenticity. In this particular case, commentary about a character design from a video game that has long since been contentious about character design. Takes like this are purposely made to get everyone to mobilize. Now again, most of this discourse is relegated to X, but you do see some trickle-down happening on Reddit and YouTube and elsewhere. And what happens is the usual culture war back and forth. Defenders own the prudes and celebrate artistic freedom, while critics amplify normalization concerns. And then I suppose you get a third angle, which is mine. Seeing the forest for the trees means you see how this is just algorithmic rocket fuel for new content, including quoted tweets, clips, essays, replies, and endless engagement. Any number of influencers on social media rely on Asmongold's takes, which they will deliver in some watered-down form to their own audiences. Good example of that is the YouTube channel Leaflet. She's basically Asmongold, except with a friendly anime persona, made to appeal to anyone leaning on a more sanitized red-pilling experience. But the main point I want to get at is the fact that Asmongold or similar influencers like him don't even need to believe in anything they say. What matters is that you believe it and you're along with the ride. Also keep in mind that Asmongold's audience is overwhelmingly male. And so what Asmongold does is he dives into these culture war flashpoints with a detached, react and analyze style that mimics the kind of stoicism that men ought to adopt. Yet much of what he and similar streamers model is essentially training his viewers how to think like women, or at least adopt female brain patterns of emotional reactivity, social signaling, and grievance prioritization. Going back to his reaction to the Stellar Blade 2 trailer, many viewers who never would have seen the alleged child in the character design will have at that moment had a filter instilled in their brain, permanently thanks to their parasocial attachments to Asmongold. This means that Zack has forced into the discourse this explicit engagement with a predetermined sexualization angle, and anyone who might not have any reason to be invested in said conversation is now compelled to reorient his perception along tribal lines, all in order to remain relevant to whatever conversation will happen next.
Because, like, you muddy the waters a lot. Like, what are we talking about here? It's just such a crazy thing to say.
And that's one of many reasons I dislike these kinds of conversation spaces, and I opt out. It's not even because I haven't formed my own opinions about these things, I have, but I'm also aware of a phenomenon known as horseshoe theory. For a discussion about how a character may or may not be child-coded, even engaging in the discussion means you're courting some level of psychological symmetry with your opponents. What I mean is, even if you position yourself as a prude, as some kind of moral gatekeeper on a topic like this, what will also be on display is that you have a deep fixation on it. In other words, while you may think you look knowledgeable, people might start to wonder why you have such a keen interest and sustained engagement with this topic.
And I'm sorry, you defended Freerin though? Because Freerin's not a lolly, you fucking retard. What are you talking about, Freerin's a lolly? She's a 1,000-year-old fucking elf. She talks like an adult. She has adult tendencies. She never acts like a child. Her proportions are not childlike. She has a role of an adult in the anime. There is nothing about Freerin that is childlike in any capacity. If you think that, you are retarded.
Most people online feel, but don't always talk, about a persistent gap between public performance and private reality. Now, we might see a fascinating shift in these dynamics if, say, browser histories for all platform users were made permanently public, including searches once thought long since deleted. And you tell me, how would the back and forth over these topics change under full transparency? Now, I'm not saying people should do this, of course. This is just a theoretical. And this all slots cleanly into the broader horseshoe theory point I want to develop here. Even though both poles sustain manufactured outrage over character designs, for instance, the real conflict is that pornography is so pervasive and ingrained in everyone's mind that it's the go-to topic for drama cycles like this one. I'm likely preaching to the choir here, knowing my channel, but if you're a porn addict and you manage to work your way out, your life will improve. And when it comes to silly things like noticing a character in a video game may or may not look like a child, your natural reaction should be, damn, what a weird thing to say.
It's just such a crazy thing to say.
And then you move on. I guarantee you won't get anywhere looking like a prude in front of some progressive retard who has any number of ways to cope with his own addictions. And that goes double for you if your prudishness is just to cover for your own proclivities. But part of the reason social media structures prioritize all this manufactured conflict is due to the common understanding that the internet is indeed for porn. Conflict is profitable, therefore, and foreign actors also like to keep us fighting among ourselves because it makes us weak. Pornography exists both as a means to cause sexual frustration and to cope with it, but naturally, pornography never satisfies. To make a long story short, the reason these talking points get picked up the way they do is because everyone is obsessed with porn. That foments a bunch of frustration that will inevitably be aimed at someone else on the other side of the culture war spectrum, and not at whomever is pulling the levers of society. In other words, not the pornography enablers. And again, who do I see is involved with the ongoing stoking of these frustrations? Well, that's why I think there ought to be more scrutiny involved with accounts like Pirate Nation and this AI Emerald Apple. Grums too, by the way. After all, Mark Kern was involved in the porn business as well. The last word on Asmongold, guys, he's really just there to turn you into a woman. Seriously. All he does is teach you how to pearl clutch. He wants you to become emotionally invested in a bunch of transient drama. But all this hyper-focus and outrage signaling and performative empathy or indignation, it's all very female-coded. Because the fact of the matter is, true male brain thinking tends toward direct problem solving. So let's be clear, all this discourse from Asmongold is designed to feminize young men.